It is 8 o'clock. F&B has a forum, and it's calling its second part of the meeting after we adjourned for the first part with public health and safety. We're going to deal with two things before we get into the discussion. Number one, where we have minutes outstanding from January 11th. I asked for people to move it. I have Peter Afanis moving. Peter, raise your hand. Charles, I have a second for you. If members from F&D unmute, if you want to vote no against
It's
the
okay.
minute,
I
hearing none, we're going to go to the next. Are there any abstentions? One need not abstain because one is now under Robert's rules reporting on the veracity of the minutes, not that you were there. And hearing none, we're going to assume that the minutes are approved unanimously. Second, we really do need to get everybody assigned to various spots in the budget. Please either give Bill Smith a call or myself and notify them what parts you want. I'll send out a list. Louisa, I put you and Iris back onto the library. Just if you did certain things last year, I don't have the list. So just tell me what you did last year and we'll re-up people. We need some people to do public works because we lost both of our public works people. Martha obviously left town and Mark returned to Public Works. And although I tried to negotiate that he just come in and help us on that one little thing, he'll participate, but he's not our buddy on that part. So if everybody can get back to me, that is extremely helpful. So we can, myself and copy Bill Smith, and then we can move on from there. Okay? So we've done that. We've taken care of that, and we're ready to go. Do you want to start your meeting, Ed?
Yeah, sure. I think Peter, if you're on, was since I'm in the car, so Peter was gonna take the lead on the initial question. So Peter, can you just call it to order and whatever else you need to take a few notes on?
So the
Sure.
first part. Go ahead, Peter. But the first part of this meeting is
Please
going
have
to be on the teacher's
whoever
contract.
has the news on in the background, mute. Somebody's still having their.
Let's assume whoever has the news on isn't listening at the moment, so you're gonna have to mute them, whoever is controlling the video. Now everybody's muted. Peter, you're up.
Yeah, hi guys. So yeah, the formality, I guess, Ed, is we're calling our meeting to order as well. And this should be joint meeting with Budget and Finance and Budget Committee to talk about, I guess, the teacher's contract and I'm not sure, but I assume also the budget itself. So I'm happy to proceed as much. There's a list of questions that we submitted to the Administration Board of Education, sort of follow up on the teacher's contract. I'm happy to go through the overall comments that we as a committee have, or I personally have, and then we can jump through these questions that I have. But that's one way to do it. I don't know if Jack, you have another way to do this.
Yeah, what I like first, Barbara Thorne, somebody told me that you have some feedback. So if you can mute yourself, that would be great. Okay, what I'd like to start is I think I see Duke and Dr. Adley. You're really small. You're really kind of small in your video over there. But can you give us a overview of the teacher's contract, and then we can go into questions on it? Let them give their overview of the contract first. Is March there with you?
So Jack, thank you. Jack, thank you. Nobody has ever looked at me and said you're very small, so I appreciate that. It's a good way to start out the meeting. Just so you know, there are a few board members on Zoom. Jill is on Zoom. She's not feeling well and just came from an HHR Zoom call. Sarah's here with me, Dr. Adley, Mark Sion, and Rich Rudel. We're all here. And just a thank you for your time and energy and everyone coming together this evening. It's much appreciated from a time standpoint. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Adley to kind of go high level over the contract. I think everyone's got most of this information, and then we can work with Peter and Jack and go through some of the questions you may have.
I just want to add something else, Duke, only because maybe you don't see the full screen, but Shirley is also here.
Yes, sorry. Shirley's on Zoom also. I was referring to people that were in the room with us.
No, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Dr. Tranberg is also on here. Our staff there, are there any questions about the budget in general? Thank you, everybody, for your time and coordinating this meeting. That is extremely helpful to us, so we appreciate that. And I just want to see if our camera's working, Jack. Mr. Riddle, do you want to say a few words to see if that camera picks you up?
Sure. It's nice to be in front of everybody.
Did she pick you up?
Nope.
Okay, I'll move around a little bit just in case. You may just scoot around a little bit, I guess. We'll scoot around if the camera's not following us. So we did send over, Peter, thank you for your questions. We'll be happy to address those questions just to get us up and running. But this contract was in the context of, I think everybody knows or is aware of a national teacher shortage. There's a shortage actually from everything from bus drivers to paraprofessionals. This has been an interesting couple of years working through COVID. Our staff has done an amazing job in that context, but we have had a number of staff members, up to 70 this year, who have moved on. That's for a number of reasons. Personal challenges along the way, travel challenges along the way, the attraction of higher salaries to neighbouring districts, just the inherent challenge of just working in the district and during the COVID times. Some people a few of the staff has offered to retire. So we have those contextual factors that sort of provide the context for negotiations. Similarly, our salary schedule was such that it wasn't attractive to our younger teachers as opposed to the higher end. So we tried to address that and make sure that we've actually dropped a couple of steps in the actual chart itself. And we wanted to make sure that it would be attractive to our teachers who were coming into the district, our youngest teachers, many of them coming out of college or just a year or two of experience. Those were the teachers where our salary scale wasn't as competitive. So this actual contract addresses that, makes it more competitive for our younger teachers, tries to address what people call the actual bubble itself. The contract, I think most people know, you've had the memorandum, is 13.68, and with the anticipated turnover, that will be a net 9.82. Premium cost shares will increase from 21 to 23 over the course of the 3 years, and we feel the design of the actual grid itself tries to address the need of the district and the need of the profession itself, and also positions the district moving forward for future negotiations to continue to try to address the attractiveness of the schedule, but also the increases at the very, very high level that particularly exist. I also would say that and you may think I would say this as a superintendent, but it is an opportunity to recognize the amazing work that our staff has done, the teaching staff in this particular case. They did a tremendous job during COVID, in the middle of COVID, leading through COVID. I would put our district against any district in terms of the in-person learning that has taken place. So our staff have proven themselves in that capacity. Both parties came to the table with an understanding and worked amicably through that particular process to land where we are, and we feel it's a fair contract both for our staff and also for our constituents in the town. With that, we're happy maybe to transition. If you want me to take a pause there, I'd be happy to do that. Or if you would like me to just transition right into perhaps some Peter's questions, but maybe the board chair wants to say a word or two.
So I think it would
Wait.
be good just to put context around this. I think it would help, since most of you on the Zoom call know all the players here, but the negotiating team from a board standpoint was myself, John Cini, Sarah Perrin, and Dave Brown. And then Jim Palin from the Board of Finance was on the negotiating committee. So we had a kickoff meeting in August, and then we set the dates and the schedules. We agreed on the timeline, a lot of long nights and a lot of in between and back and forth as you go through this process. We took a little bit of a different approach in that we're going to work together as a team. We understood what the teachers had gone through, what our students had gone through, what we'd gone through. And, they really carried us through COVID. We got a lot of comments as to how we continued our educational delivery through COVID. So then we went into 4 negotiation sessions. And once we decided on the 4th session, kind of mutually decided between both sides that we would go into mediation. We decide on a mediation person and pick a mediation date. We continue the dialogue through that process. And I will tell you, I've been involved in this a couple of times. It was more collaborative than ever. And when we came into mediation, we decided traditionally you start mediation where we go to our room and they go to their room, and the mediator starts running back and forth. We decided to kick off the mediation night together, reestablish our goals and our commitments to the students and doing the right thing from a contract standpoint. And then throughout the course of mediation, which started at 4 and ended at about 3:30 in the morning, we actually went back and forth as board members and as union reps and literally worked on the fly on Excel spreadsheets and moving numbers around and working on percentages and dollar amounts. And we've never really done that before. And I think it got everyone came to each meeting very well prepared, both sides, in terms of looking at steps, the step costs, economic costs. So I just think it's important to reiterate, it was one of the more collaborative negotiation sessions I've been part of. Jim Palin was a big part of it from a Board of Finance standpoint. And we literally sat at this table with union members without a mediator and did Excel spreadsheets on the screen we're looking at right now. And I think it got us to the right place in terms of everyone feeling good about where we landed. So I'll pause there because it's important that we hear some of your questions and comments, but thank you for listening.
Before we go there, I think Jim Palin did an excellent job at the Board of Finance talking about some of the changes on how this contract is done. In the past, there might be an increase that was then spread, I'm just come up with a number, 2%, and every grade got the same increase. My understanding is it was not done that way this year. So I think that explanation and part of the strategy on competing with the entry level is important to hear as well. If either Jim wants to take it on or somebody from the Board of Ed wants to.
Rich, do you want
Yeah. So we did do a salary. It wasn't increased just by percentages. It was increased by an equal salary amount for the lower steps, and then just a higher salary amount for the higher step. If you want to talk to that, right, this one.
I mean, we looked at a lot of different models when we negotiated. We looked at the traditional, you place GWI on the bottom steps and then a higher GWI at the top. The board had concerns about how that spreads the top step and the steps below it. We looked at equal dollar distribution, which we ultimately is what we settled at, which was $1,500 for every step between 5 and 19, and then $2,600 on step 20, the top step. We also looked at the possibility of, collapsing some of the salary schedules. We looked at possibly collapsing lanes, which we didn't end up doing, but we also collapsed steps. So we went from having, I believe it was 16 steps to, or ended up 16 steps, and we had 15 or 17 prior to that. So we looked at a lot of variations on how this could work. Everybody really worked through the TEG, which is the Teacher Experience Grid, to see which different models would work out best. Mr. Palin was a part of that. The board was a part of that. I was a part of that. Marge was a part of that. And then the teachers had it as well as on their own side.
I want to go through just one of the things again. So if the lowest steps got 1,500, obviously that's a different percentage for each of those steps because of their salary range. Same thing with the upper steps getting $2,000. So effectively not every step got the same increase. They got the same money dollar amount, but not the same percentage increase. Is that correct statement?
So that's correct. And that was really as a way to drive more money down the scale as opposed to having it at the top of the scale.
Thank you. And that is different than how some of these contracts had been negotiated in the past. So I thought that was important. Jim raised that in the Board of Finance meeting, and I thought he did a nice job of that in his board meeting. Okay, now we can go to questions.
Yeah, so before I go to these questions, if I may, I just want to say one or two things. I want to applaud the negotiating team to get where we got. I mean, this is the biggest contract that we have. It covers 40% of our annual budget each year for the next 3 years, and achieving these two objectives. There's multiple objectives, but the two big ones, obviously, limiting the increase to between 3 and 3.2% a year. Given where we are in the economy is I think very acceptable, and secondarily, and probably even more importantly, to put us at the top of the salary ranking within our within Fairfield County and DRG, moving from 16th to 5th and from 5th to 1st is great, and hopefully it will dispel any issues and bigger turnover that we have. So that's number one. And then, the questions that I have, there's not that many. That was a great, nice slide presentation, nice memo we got. So thank you for that. And the questions I really have are, somehow related just to clarifying this contract. And the second piece is really about tools, whether we or the superintendent has to differentiate teachers not only on the basis of years served, but also on the quality of education they provide to our students. And I know it's not easy in these union contracts to find those, but I have one or two questions.
Peter,
It seems like maybe there's.
I do want to add something to what Peter said. While we did move up in our scale, please understand that if you look at our DERG and around this area, not every town does a teacher's contract in the same year. It's typically a 3-year. So we could be behind because somebody, I think New Canaan, just had a contract done last year. So every year that somebody increases, it's going to change our rankings because they look at prior contracts from around the DERG. So that's something to understand. And yes, it's good that we are now going higher up in the DERG and in the county, but it's not something that's going to last. Only because next year there's new contracts coming up, and they're going to look at what we did and other towns did around the area. Just so that everybody understands that little nuance here.
I think just to reiterate Peter's point, I think it was important, it more so than even my previous involvement, where it was a negotiation around dollars. This was a negotiation with a strategy and specific goals around recruitment and around retention, and making sure that Marge had the tools she needed to recruit. And I think at the end of the day, Marge would agree that, you know, we positioned ourselves that as difficult as it is to recruit in general because of the teacher shortage, that we've given the administration the tools they need to retain, because that's key, and we've given them the tools that they need to recruit.
Great. Wonderful. Yeah, so I guess the first question is, you know, the settlement $4.5 million implies 10% increase. Implicitly, it's a $45 million sort of budget item. And when I looked at the teachers, you know, in our personnel in the budget, it's more like 31 million teachers themselves. So I want to make sure I understand who is actually covered by this contract. I assume it's teachers, also special ed, speech pathologists. Could you just clarify that for us, please, who everybody's covering this?
So teachers are included, special education teachers are included, psychologists, guidance counselors, librarians, SLPs are included, psychologists are included, social workers are included as well. And then obviously we do have some teachers, not many, that are in grants like the IDEA grant and the title grant. So those are obviously included as well.
Right, right. And I assume all of our teachers are part of the union. There was an interesting language towards the end of the contract suggesting maybe not, but you know, are they all covered, or somebody chose not to be covered by the union contract and negotiates on its own?
So the recent Supreme Court case made it clear, that teachers do not have to join the union. We have probably 6 or 7 teachers at any time who don't belong.
Got it. Thank you.
But just to expand on that, because there's a couple of things. Just because they're not paying the union dues, what the contract says, they are still applied to them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Understood.
And I did want to say something else. While we always refer to this as a teacher's contract, Rich mentioned it yesterday when people were asking for FTEs and where they were. It could better be called the certified staff contract, because all those covered under it are certified staff. If that gives you a broader definition, if that's also a correct statement.
There's 485 people covered in this contract.
Thank you.
You know, one of the goals of the negotiation was obviously move the bottom of the, of the grid up. And it seems like the contract gives the superintendent, in consultation with the DA, ability to provide up to 5 additional steps to teachers. And I guess my question is, this applies only to the new teachers, I assume, right? There's no ability for superintendent to make, to have somebody.
That flexibility is something that I have and that we can use, but it's not used retrospectively to reward a teacher who is already with us. It's for new teachers who are coming into the district. The board actually, through negotiations, created more flexibility for us, because typically if there's a shortage area, it's dictated by the state of Connecticut. But through negotiations, we also were able to put in there that for our Lions districts, which are really the inner city districts, they have more options for shortages. It describes more shortage areas for teachers, whether, I'm making this up, whether it's immediate, specialist, or otherwise. And that has been put into the contract, so it expands the flexibility that we have to extend that provision to a greater category of teachers. So that was another negotiation through the language.
So I guess that, I was hoping that's the carrot, right? But obviously that works only for the new teachers, not the existing. And I on the other side of the stick, right?
Peter, could you get a little closer to the phone? Yeah. It's tough to hear you.
I think.
Thank you so much.
will try. Sorry. So the stick part of this thing, right? Obviously, we want to reward teachers, exceptional teachers, and then work with teachers who who we want to improve. And it seems like Article 3 on page 6, Section 6, provides us with, or the superintendent, with the ability to withhold performance increment. And I just wanted to clarify that, my understanding of that provision. Does this mean that if there is a dissatisfaction with performance of a particular teacher, Dr. Adley, you can say, you're not going to follow to another step? You repeat this one?
Technically, yes. We tend to address that another way through our teacher evaluation plan. That's in line with the state, and they approve the plan. It's approved by the board every year, and then it's approved by the state of Connecticut. So we typically, I'll let Mark talk about that, but we typically do it through a sort of evaluation process and a support process. But do you want to talk to it a little bit?
Right, so when we have teachers who are not meeting our expectations, we put them on a support plan. And more often than not, if they're not successful on that support plan, we counsel them, and the union helps us, we counsel them to find another job because they could be successful in another district, but before we get to the point of withholding a step.
Understood. Okay, so that's used very seldom, if at all, right?
Yep.
It's about, got it. All right, great. And then I guess the last sort of question I have here on this is the steps, is the grades itself. And I know Dr. Adley just mentioned bubble, and I know Mr. Cena in your November meeting when you approved this contract mentioned that you tried to prevent the bubble. Could you please elaborate on it, what we did?
Okay. So the bubble grows historically because you typically get a higher GWI at the top step and a lower GWI on the other steps. And so what ends up happening is the gap between the top step and the top step tends to grow over time. So while we still have a bubble in the grid, one of the benefits of doing equal dollar distribution and some adjustments with the steps did slow it slightly. Because we have more dollars going on the grid below the top step. We certainly still have a bubble, but it did narrow slightly as you get to that third year of the contract.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. Well, these are the major questions. I mean, obviously, there's ability for teachers to earn some money and support others as mentors, and also take advantage of tuition reimbursement. I just wanted to sort of get a sense from you folks whether teachers are aware of this and whether they take advantage of it. It seems like a great benefit.
Right, so there were 21 teachers last year who took advantage of tuition reimbursement, and that's actually more than we've seen in the past, because we clarified some language in the last contract that allows some online courses, provide that they show the same amount of rigor as what's offered by, for example, the state of Connecticut, University of Connecticut. So we do have more teachers, and it's good for everyone when they do that.
Wonderful. And the mentorship program, to see a collaboration among teachers and education professionals. Do people take advantage of it?
Right, so we're required by the state of Connecticut for brand new teachers new to the profession to provide a mentor so that they complete 4 modules of a mentorship program, a teacher entry program. And so we have encouraged more and more teachers. It requires special training. They get $250, which used to come from the state, and the district is now absorbing more and more of that for each module completed. And this year we have a new coordinator of the mentors, and she's gotten more people to be trained and signed up. But we have a lot of new teachers, and I think I said we had 43.
So last year was 43.
43. Wonderful. Great. Well, that's all I had. I just wanted to thank you again, the negotiating team, and also the support team who got us where we are. I think this is a success, and I know this drives an increase in the next 3 years budget that people were not used to, but we obviously are in a different world compared to 2020. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Question. Can I ask a question?
Why not?
Jack's disappeared.
Jack's disappeared. Quick, Clara, ask.
Okay, I'll be quick. Okay, I had a couple. One, I believe Marge talked about more teachers taking advantage of the tuition reimbursement than previously, and I just wondered, do you anticipate more column change situations based on the fact that some may be getting masters or beyond? I don't know if you want to answer that right now. The other question is regarding Section 8 in Article 13. Did you have any pushback about the tutoring statements? One of the people on our committee the other night thought that maybe it was a little too harsh to say that teachers couldn't tutor, and we did point out that they can tutor other kids other than the ones in their class. I think that's correct. I just wondered if everybody on the staff is okay with the statements about tutoring.
So we got the tutoring language not in this contract, but the one before.
Right,
It was
right.
a big gain. It was a big gain for us because some districts had it, but we didn't have any. And so they've been living with it for 3 years, and we haven't really heard pushback.
Good.
Then in terms of the column change, the year that we're currently in was actually one of the highest levels of column changes that we've had. It was about a little over $100,000 worth of column changes. Obviously, it does fluctuate year to year, as it does take a while to get whether it's 15, 30 credits. So typically it would range in that $60,000 range, but we were as high as $100,000 this year.
Okay, thank you.
Jack or Ed, anything else?
On the
This is actually
contract,
Curtis Butler. I have a question if I could add.
yeah, go ahead, Curtis.
We don't have everyone up on the screen. Just let us know who's speaking.
Yes, this is Curtis Butler. I'm on the phone. Thank you for taking my question. First of all, I want to congratulate everybody in the district and the Board of Ed for managing what has been an incredibly challenging period. COVID aside, the loss of so many staff members and still be able to deliver daring quality education is nothing short of a miracle. So thank you for that. My question is actually related to something that Jack alluded to, which is the risk that the contract, that the increases don't remain competitive for long. Last year's CPI was greater than 7%. This year it may look like something like 5 or 6%. Other districts may be responding more to that. Can you address how confident we are, how confident you are that this will hold up and we will be able to compete better for teachers with some of the better districts around? Thank you.
So in our DIRG, Weston was the other district that negotiated, and then, well, not in our DIRG, but a similar district, Greenwich, negotiated this year. So in comparison to those two districts, we are pretty confident. Other districts that we are in our DIRG, like New Canaan and Westport, they have at least 2 years that will overlap with this contract. So certainly for the first 2 years, we would expect to be very competitive. And even if you look past that third year, the likelihood that we'll slide significantly is pretty slim, given just how TEGs work and how increases are applied. You're not likely to have a Westport or a New Canaan 3 years out when they're negotiating their contract before ours is up, have such a significant increase that ours starts to slide significantly. And when we look throughout the state, some of the districts that are higher than us, Greenwich is one of them, and then on the lower end, oddly enough, Monroe is too, and they're still quite far from us in other areas of their salary schedule.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions associated with the contract? If not, then we're going to vote on it. And education, you can vote right after. But
We voted on Monday on the contract.
okay, we have not voted, so we're going to vote now. I need somebody from F&B to move this motion. I have Barry moving. I have Beth seconding. I don't have a screen of everyone here, so I'm going to do the following. I can't see everyone. There's 30 people on board. And my screen doesn't take all of it. Are there any no votes? If there is, unmute yourself and say no and identify yourself. Hearing none, are there any abstentions? No no's, no abstentions. Forever hold your peace. I am going to assume then that this is a unanimous approval of the teacher contract. Just raise your hand if I can see who's there, and we're in good shape. Bert, Jenny, Barry, I see it. Okay, so we are unanimous. Did you get that, Jenny? Okay. Now we can go on to the next part of the meeting.
Thanks. Dr. Adley Duke, I know you have, the questions that we submitted, but I wonder, and folks may have a few others, but I guess, sort of picking up on the some of the questions that F&B, asked last night, I guess, could you maybe sort of speak to a bit of this, the sort of the concept of, prioritization, like, in terms of the things in the budget, whether it's, the new hires, across the, across the budget, like how, I realize it may be a bit of a hypothetical, but like, is there any way that you can kind of guide us on what you sort of see, Dr. Adley, or what your team sort of sees as the most important of these?
Now, thank you, Ed. I'll just kick it off briefly, and then I think between Alan and Marge and Rich, and I think what, the board has done working hand in hand with all the hard work and the good work the administration has done is, we've said this at a few board meetings that our priorities are the health and safety of our students. And I think if we start at that premise, that then guides us down the changes to the security protocols that are in the budget and the changes that we're talking about from a mental health standpoint. So, I think those are always priorities, but I think the events over the last year and a half to 2 years have kind of moved those priorities up in terms of how we want to focus on them. I think, ground maintenance and custodial just comes with some of the stuff that we're doing in the district. The other component of it from a special ed standpoint is just the need to provide services to our children that have identified services that they need. That is a challenge in terms of finding the people to deliver those services. But I think the administration has looked hard and long at what the needs are, and we're just starting to see a lot of them. We talk about what is the remediation, and I think early on we saw some of it. Our children are incredibly resilient, but I think we're starting to continue to see what the remediation needs are, and the administration, and especially Shirley Klein and her team, are looking at what are the needs to, accommodate those children with services. The challenge is finding the resources to provide those services, but, the district has continued a commitment to do that, and we've talked from a communication standpoint, and we've had a lot of parent involvement and parent feedback, which we respect and we're working through. So I think, the safety and security of our students, the health of our students, the needs of our students that have services that need to be delivered to them, the certain curriculum in terms of Mandarin that we're expanding, that comes into play. And there are some needs with sizes of athletic teams and assistant coaches. So I'll pause there and let Dr. Adley pick it up from there.
Yeah, I think Mr. Deneen, the board chair, has accurately portrayed kind of where we are and what some of the priorities happen to be. We certainly, we presented this budget, sort of the core of the budget and then the growth of the budget, as well over 3% of the core of the budget in core expenditures. In terms of, again, safety and security, mental health, the special services for our students and some of the special programming that our young people are in, those are things either by IEP or otherwise that we feel are just critical support networks that we need to support. So those are those areas that are significantly important in the budget, and clearly carrying forward the security that we had this particular year. The only other one I would say is just enrollment. We just need to continue to address enrollment, support enrollment. The board looked at the enrollment policy throughout the year, so it's important that we continue to recognize that. So there are positions in the budget, a couple of positions in the budget that have enrollment. So other programs that clearly I'm putting forward as a proposed budget, some other inclusions in the budget that include a couple of the languages, sign language, Mandarin. So I mean, those are important to keep continuing. We have robotics in there. I think it's critically important to continue that particular program. But I think between what Duke has said and what I've said there, those are really the main priorities. If the board hasn't asked me to prioritize anything at this particular point, that's a general. I think it would be all sort of consensus that that's the general direction that we would prioritize.
I'm going to cut in here.
The only thing I would add there, and I think it's important, as I know, since I know almost everyone on the call, we all drive around town and we see what's going on in town. We did have our demographer back this year for our enrollment study. I think we've agreed, or we will agree, to do a demographer again this year. I think it's important with the amount of development going on in town. We have spent time and energy, and Rich has done a great job working with Town Hall and even some of the developers who are community members to understand, and we are tracking as these developments come online what the enrollment numbers start to look like. But we have had for years Federal, Corbin, and some of those other districts built into these forecasts. We'll now look at Parkland, and as some of the Nielsen properties start to move forward, it's important with the amount of development going on that we continue to look at those numbers on a regular basis. So that's a key component. Rich, if you could, I think it would help, and it's always a question that Jack asks, and I think we've gotten to a good place in presenting the data, but Rich, just the core budget, operating budget, the new budget, the components that you break it down just at a high level, I think they're good numbers.
Mr. Chairman, just before he does that, could I just mention that another item in the budget that is critical important to us, and it's connected to the teacher contract in some ways, is the support for substitute teachers, because we can't get drivers, you can't get substitute teachers, and so we have a proposal in the budget to support the additional days, three substitute teachers for each building for the 5 days for consistency for each of the schools, and so we have qualified people in front of the kids. So that was the other thing that was significant in the budget. But Rich, if you want to talk about the
wait, before Rich goes, having done priorities in my professional career, all priorities can't be number one. But as an outsider looking in, I would say, from just my observation, and I think, Duke, you alluded to it, that the priorities were, number one, the safety and security. However, with the implementations that we've had, that may have now dropped to number two. And the mental health is the number one priority for our students based upon the initiatives and other things that are going on in the social emotional well-being. So that seems to be currently the number one priority, followed by security. special ed is a legal requirement, hence that always ends up being in the top three because you're
Yeah, but sorry, Jack, I'm going to interrupt. It may be a legal requirement, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to hire this particular person. I mean, I guess
what I
don't.
just want to say
Yeah.
is where they're allocating some of their funds because that's driving it. So, and then the other things are coming there. But as again, I understand that things are important to the budget, but they're not all number one. And looking at how resources are being allocated is part of the reason why F&B is asking for priorities. That's all I'm saying.
Sorry, and I guess I would not to take away. I mean, what you said and sort of how you look at the priorities is helpful, but I guess if this is a zero-based budget and there was something that was a really high priority, it might mean something else that's in the budget. It would have to go away. So I
That's
mean,
if
I realize you may have been
Ed,
answering.
that's if you believe this is a zero-based budget, which some of us do not.
Well,
So
but I'm just saying. I asked the question about priorities, and I think Dr. Adley answered it, and Duke answered it as I meant it, which is among these new things, what is it that's most important?
but
But
this is a
let's
joint.
not
I'm
forget.
going to be very blunt. This is a
Jack. Sorry,
joint.
could you, Jack, please.
It's a joint
Let-
meeting. We
Yeah,
asked
but
on
that doesn't
priorities.
mean you can. You doesn't mean you get to interrupt me or everyone else. Yes, just please let me finish. Um, if you have sorry, go ahead. Sorry, everyone else watching is probably entertained. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ed. Did you want to finish up?
Yeah, sorry. So if there were very important priorities that you wanted to add and we didn't have the funds to support it, it might mean something else would have to be cut that was already being offered. That was my only point, just as a observation.
I think it's I hear you both, and I appreciate the question, Ed. And I think when the board, again, just everyone keep in mind, this is the superintendent's proposed budget, and I think in speaking to board members, we'll do some of our work next week in terms of some of the things we're thinking about, which will then, I think, fine tune some of the priorities, and we'll do that working in consultation with the administration. I think that's part of the process.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I guess on that, in that vein, I think what would be helpful, and I'm always struck at how helpful I find the presentation on the capital budget, because that is looking 5 years out, and I think this was again something that F&B raised in their comments about trends. So when I look at some of the increases in headcount, it's not just the increase in headcount in this budget. It's like, wait, this is the increase in headcount, and we haven't really had a big enrollment jump. So what happens across all of the different departments and functions if we actually have 50 new students or 100 new students? And what happens if in some areas where we have added a lot of people, if that rate of growth continues, like at some point you get to this level of it's just not sustainable unless we make changes to what we're doing. And so I guess where I would find it really helpful is if there are, in the presentation of the operating budget, we're able to use some of the data we get from the demographer to actually try to extrapolate forward, well, what might this mean for staffing in these departments in 5 years? Because if we look at that and say, holy crap, we're going to have 50 more people, like that may cause us all to collectively say we need to think about what we can do differently. So I don't necessarily look at, is 11 people too much in this budget year, but more like, well, I'm thinking ahead 5 years, and what does this 11 people translate to by year 5?
So Ed, I think you bring up a good point, and I think a takeaway for everyone the committees that we work with and the board and the administration is that while we do, what did we do, Rich, a 5-year forecast every year? It's more based on economies and it's just a broad-based, here's where we see the budget, over the next 5 years. I think the takeaway from this is, what I think we need to do is look at these increases and go out 5 years as to what they look like, and to your point, tie them to the enrollment. I think, increases in IEPs, it gets into a little crystal balling, but I think from an enrollment standpoint, we can start to do probably some different stuff in terms of forecasting so you can see out further. So I think that's a good takeaway from these conversations.
Thanks.
Jack, do you want to go back to you? Or anyone else? Sure. Go ahead, Clara.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the comments about the questions last night. I know, some may be repetitive or some may have been answered elsewhere, but I think there are a couple of reasons. I think I would rather see this whole process be a little more of a dialogue. At one time long ago, it actually was. I mean, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on written down questions and written down answers. It was a sort of more back and forth. I don't know if that would be easier for the administration or whether it would be harder, but there are only some questions that require research. Some just require a little bit of conversation. And I just wanted to say that I think some folks were a little upset that, there was some pushback about the questions, not that it isn't deserved from time to time, but I just think maybe if we could look to this as a conversation and a dialogue, rather than a very strict, here's my list of questions, here's the list of answers, now that's it. I think it's got to be a little bit more of an ongoing dialogue, but that's just my 2 cents to, people can react or not react. But anyway, I thought that might be helpful.
I think I appreciate that, Clara. I don't, we're having the dialogue now, and I know
Right.
we may have another meeting or two, break it down between education and F&B. And I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate everyone listening last night. I'll just reinforce that, we're all, for the most part, business people, whether we're running a household or a business, but there are some efficiencies that we should think about. And, we just have to understand we've got folks that have worked all day that are sitting on these calls at night, and it just, everyone needs to do their homework, so to speak. But I appreciate your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Jan, you had your hand raised. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
I actually I put my hand down, but I just wanted to agree with Clara that I think it would be easier if some of this could get done in person or on Zoom rather than having everything in writing. Sometimes I think doing it all in writing gets more complex, longer, and less to the point than it is if you just ask a short question and get a quick answer. So that's all I wanted to say is I agree with Clara.
Are there any other questions? I know you just got some budget questions. Duke, I do want to say I do concur with that, at least after this budget, that it might be worthwhile to have a conversation on some of the things that you and I've talked about that might be policy changes or a new way of looking at certain things to improve the process and the exchange. And I think that part of what Clara was saying, I do concur from when she was on the board and later. It wasn't just a one-off. There could be some conversation because some of the concepts that have been presented, and I know this is still the superintendent's budget. Our committee is fully aware that the board has yet to start to vet and put things out there. But some of the concepts cannot just be given to somebody and 1 or 2 people and then not have a full discussion of how it would work, how it would be implemented. Example, conversations that I've had about potentially having some vacancy offset on that. So I'm just bringing that up, not that I'm suggesting that, but like that would be a conversation so everybody understands what it is, what's been experienced, and other things like that. Where Rich and I've had a conversation, you and I had a conversation after the meeting on. So I do think that's a great idea, Duke, on pursuing after this budget session.
Yeah, I think, you know, the takeaways, I think, and look, we're all committed. We've got a great partnership all the way around here, and it's, you know, it's the biggest budget in town. And I think the takeaway is we figure out who from each committee, you know, and form kind of a, you know, a budget summit. And we talk about how everyone feels good about the flow of information. I think the forecasting is a key component of it. And then we talk about the process and even timelines. Sometimes these timelines get tight, and you know we're continuing to do just normal board business through this process. But we'll make a commitment to have kind of that meeting and have some takeaways from there.
I do have a question to Dr. Adley. I know I know people say watch the meeting, and I was at the meeting, but I just want to make sure I understood the answer to it. I believe on the 24th there's going to be a discussion on the social emotional, and the reference was, I believe, from Julie, that it wasn't just going to be an org chart, that there would be more to it than just the organization going across, which was Dennis's. And I didn't quite hear the answer on what's really being presented from the administration to the board on the 24th on that topic. So
Jack. On that topic, it will be Darien High School mental health supports and how they all interconnect and support each other and support our students. So it's trying to look at a 360 sort of view at the high school mental health supports system.
And can I ask a direct question?
Jack, what we asked, and I think Alan will start the dialogue there too. We asked, I think Julie Best asked or another board member, like, we need to take that down to middle school too and see what, you know, start to understand what the needs are there. And then I think what, you know, the board has talked to the administration about is when that director of mental health comes on board, what is that 30, 60, 90, you know, what does each month look like, including as we go through the summer and into a new school year. So,
well, maybe a 6-month thing also. I mean, I understood that the person is qualified, but yeah, there's something
and I will, you know, I'll tell you is, you know, you know, the incidents that pulled us all together are incredibly tragic, but the administration and the district are very much aligned, and the town was part of the interview process and the thought process around this. So I think, you know, the benefit too is that we're not looking at it from just a school standpoint, but a community standpoint, because as we all know, there are a lot of kids that don't come to our schools that live in town and go to school elsewhere, but participate in intramurals and other sports. So we have to approach this from a community standpoint also.
Well, that's a good question. I know that there's the mental health task force that's on the town side. Can you mention how the Board of Ed participates in that and how that feeds back into some of the programs that the Board of Ed is adopting?
Well, yeah, we're involved in that.
We're part of it.
We're involved
Yeah,
in that.
I know that part.
Intrinsically, and then we're also, Shirley Klein's involved in it, Gil McCann's involved in it, I am, Duke is. Then we also have Dr. McCarthy. We're also represented on the subcommittees, so we're working closely alongside Ali Ramstead, and Ali has been instrumental in supporting, in many ways, the director of mental health. She was also, just for your reference, she was also part of the interview process, and part of that job is also going to liaison with the town, resources for all our students. So we're intrinsically working closely with the town on that mental health task force.
So the director of mental health who's coming on board, I know dates have changed, but now it's effective March 1st. And you have a program, Team Talk, out there. has the new director of mental health, in whatever capacity, whether or not it was a consultant before or provided the administration with their opinion on Teen Talk being adopted?
So in this case, until she comes on board, that she has not. We've reached out to various clinicians and professionals who we've been working with since the tragic situation that occurred last year. So we've worked with those closely with those organizations to give us advice and counsel around Teen Talk. I've also talked directly to all the superintendents. We feel it's appropriate to move forward with the high school wellness center, the recommendation there to have that staff throughout the day. And I feel comfortable moving forward with the Teen Talk. Teen Talk will also be, from Kids in Crisis program, will also be on the agenda for Tuesday evening. So there'll be a presentation there on how that program will work. We talked about the middle school a moment ago. I don't feel comfortable enough until the director comes on board to implement that at the middle school. I do feel working with the high school administration, they're ready to utilize that particular service at this point, and it will be extremely helpful to our students and families.
If I may, I have a comment here, if I may, very quickly. I just would urge the administration to involve teachers as much as possible in this. You know, they obviously know the students most from anyone, spending so much time with them every day, and you know, some of these programs as they come together, would be better to be driven or at least consulted with them rather than from you know, from top down.
Thank you, and Peter, our teachers have done a tremendous job. The high school administration works with our staff in making proposals for the budget, and this is one of them. And I also say that we've also worked closely with staff in meeting their mental health needs also. So I appreciate the perspective of input from our teachers, because it's always more meaningful when that's the case. And I also appreciate your understanding of actually their care and needs. Thank you.
Dr. Adley, I have another question on capital. You know, we understand that new things are going to come up periodically as you either find information, something new on security, something else. It sort of caught me and some members of the committee a little bit by surprise with the auditorium and the audio. And I'm not questioning the value of it, other things like that. I don't get into that, but I'm just curious, how was that missed before, or how did that like get expedited?
Jack, I think that's a fair question, and I think the board has a similar understanding of that this is new, and it is new in the sense that we didn't identify that before. It wasn't identified before, but it has been identified now, and we've been limping along with some resources up there. It's a wonderful auditorium, but there are some things that are outdated and so on. And we did have the program reviewed by CES, their performing arts technician and so on, and recommendations were made. But about a month ago, when we first did the presentation to the board, at that point it was a new item to the board. We are actually talking about this tomorrow morning in the facilities committee. So the board it's new to them too. And I've put it on there, asking there for consideration. Understanding we don't like surprises, and understanding we'd like to plan everything out. But that being said, I put it on as a consideration given the current need that is there.
Yeah, I thought the presentation during Super Saturday was a good presentation of what it was. All right, so I wasn't questioning the quality of it. I tend not to do that, not being an educator or audio visual person, but it was a little surprising to see a significant amount of money over 2 years, like, you know, like, where did this come from type of response.
I can understand that.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I had my hand up, but
Sorry,
I
Meg, I missed you.
No worries. This is Meg Bat with the Education Committee. I just had a quick question regarding Genius Hour. I was tentative at best about it last year, but it seemed like an intriguing program. And then when I read the response about what the program, how it's working so far, it was more on what the course curriculum actually is as opposed to what the feedback has been. And I know with parents that I've talked to who have children at Middlesex, my own son goes to Middlesex, the feedback has been at best mixed, but mostly it's been, not very supportive. So what I wanted to know is, it's sort of twofold. Is this a program that needs to continue, or is it something that, we could sort of view as an elective that is not necessary? It's we gave it a shot last year. It was not, it didn't have the kind of material impact that maybe was intended. And secondly, if we did decide to, cut the program for next year, does that change any FTE amount, like by 0.2 or 0.3 or what have you? I guess, when I was listening to the BOE meeting a couple nights ago, and I saw that a few students had come and took the time to come to BOE and speak about the robotics club. I have no problem with allocating $16,000 to something that's a little more eccentric or esoteric, but I'd rather it be allocated to robotics than to Genius Hour, which, from all accounts, has not been very successful. At least this year it hasn't. So is that, again, I'm sorry if I'm talking in circles. So really the two-part question is, is it something that we can actually do without and that does not mess up the curriculum? And secondly, what would be, if any, the FTE impact? Thank you.
Mr. Tramberg's on here. I'll let him talk a wee bit in a minute. But Megan, I'll say respectfully that I don't concur with the comment that it's or the perspective that it's not doing what it is meant to be doing. And we're in January. We haven't the kids haven't even completed. Excuse me. The students haven't even completed the projects that they were meant to be doing. So an evaluation of it at this point is a little bit premature. And I can tell you that the staff and administration at the middle school feel this is a very valued program and a very useful program. It doesn't mean to say it won't be evaluated at the end of the year. But at this point, if people have concerns about the program, I would suggest that they talk to the principal or myself, because that's not the perspective we have, and that the students are engaged in the projects that they're doing. But we're still only halfway through the year. I don't know, Chris, if you have anything else to add to that, but I say that respectfully back, Megan. It's not going to save any FTEs, reducing it. This is actually, I'll just be honest, I think this is a big return for a small, you just talked about robotics, and similarly, you said 15,000, it's obviously more, but this program, for me, is a small amount of money for a significant gain on what we're providing our students. Chris, I don't know, do you have anything else to say, or that suffice for you?
I would just echo that it's one of the few areas where students actually have choice other than the selection of their world language at the middle school. And I believe they've only had maybe 4 or 5 Genius Hours, so I agree that it's a bit early to assess.
Okay, that's fair.
You did. Are there any other people with their hand raised that have questions for the board or the administration?
Yeah, sorry, it's Ed Wisheka. This is on robotics. I think that there were a lot of comments from members of the committee that were very supportive of the robotics program. I think one question that I had with respect to the cost, and I'm not remembering the numbers, but like there was a pretty sizable chunk for field trips, and I guess if it was, I'm going to say it was $20,000, but if there are 350 kids and they're all going to Norwalk and it costs, $10 a kid, that might be looked at a little bit differently than if it's, 10 kids going on a trip at $2,000 a pop. So I guess, I think some of the Board of Ed members might have had some of the same question, but because it is kind of a large amount of money for a club getting a better sense of, well, is it a large amount of money because there are like a lot of people on it, and this money is being spent, across that whole group, or it just happens to be that some of these trips are expensive, and obviously there are other clubs and councils where parents pay or kids have to raise money to go on these trips. So I just, if you can answer it now, great. But if it's something that comes back in one of the written questions, that's probably helpful for people.
I recognize that the cost per student is high, and I would say that the program itself is touching over 300 students. I would say the program has been successful in the 2 years. It's changed slightly over the 2-year period. I very much appreciate the support, financial support, and resources from the Jerry Ann Foundation for it. I would say it's not an athletic sport, but there are other athletic sports that cost per students are compatible or significantly higher than robotics. Now, robotics is not a sport, but to some of these kids, actually, some of them who actually turned up, it is a sport. If you ever go to one of these events, like the first robotics events, you actually think you're at a sporting event. The way that participants participate, and also the community members come to support the kids. But I know that's going to continue to have a discussion, but it's been successful in 2 years, and I would hope we'll find a way to continue that for our kids.
Yeah, and again, and I want to emphasize, I mean, there is a lot of support from members of the committee on it. So I just want to be clear on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, obviously part of our job is not only to see the vision that you guys fulfilling and whether we agree with it or not as RTM, but also the efficiency of the system, which leads me to the question regarding the excess cash sitting, I guess, in our Board of Education accounts that was mentioned, and there was some back and forth at Super Saturday. And I know, Mr. Rudel, is there in conversation with Board of Finance, or how is this cash managed? Are we maximizing it, at current 5% or 4-5% interest rates? It's actually meaningful if we have $1 million or $500,000 sitting somewhere.
So I think there's a misunderstanding of how the Board of Education is actually funded. We don't actually get a cash appropriation of $110 million. We're not wired money. We don't have to get a check of that money. All that cash sits at the town and is managed by the town based on whatever cash guidelines that they have. And then the Board of Ed, there's a Board of Ed town reconciliation where we reconcile our expenses to the town appropriation for the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed does have 3 bank accounts that are separate from that appropriation. The first is for food service. So the food service fund is a non-governmental special revenue account by statute. And so if you look at the annual audit, you'll see that's separated out as a special revenue fund. So we do have cash there, and that supports the food service fund. So any food service expenses get paid out of that. And then we carry a fund balance in there, and that fund balance tends to ebb and flow. You typically have to dip into that fund balance in the beginning of the year because you have some sunk costs, whether it's staffing and retirement and food costs as you kind of get the program up, and then it fluctuates up. We have an ELP account, which is really just a depository account. So when parents pay online for tuition, it comes into that bank account, and then we write a check to the town for that tuition. So there really isn't any cash there to invest or get a return on. And then there's student activity accounts. And so the student activity accounts are really, parent contributions, donations, fees that are collected for various events or banquets, and then payments are made out of that. And so that account can have a lot of money that goes in and out of it. It probably has over $1 million that go into it and out of it in any given year. But we typically only sit on a few $100,000, and a lot of that money has to be liquid because it is a receipt of money for, let's say, a donation for a playground or maybe something else, and then a payment that comes right out of that as it is. So the only real cash that we're sitting on that we could hold that's in excess is that food service account.
I'm going to add to that. At the end, I did say to Rich that I would speak to Jen, and I've spoken to Joan, and there's 2 aspects to it. Number one, some may be aware that based upon the number of transactions that are also flowing in and out of this account, banking does require that there's an earnings credit based upon what the balances are in those accounts that covers some of the expenses. So it's not as if you have a sweep account that you bring it down to zero. Otherwise, the Board of Ed would end up with some banking fees. The amount of cash and the fluidity of what exists in that does not allow the type of investments that was suggested. And they can't go into treasuries and other things like that because that does tie things up. So this has been addressed with Jen and Rich, Duke, and some others, and the answer is at this time no. But the rest of the funds that we appropriate, that we get coverage and taxes, that's all dealt with in the general funds, and that does have investments that are doing quite well. So just to answer that question, we did follow up on that very quickly.
Thank you.
Can I Ed Washak again? Can I ask a question on the track that was referenced recently in the finance committee? And I guess this is where you went out for bid, didn't get any local ones. You got this other one that's coming. Like, and I'm not a construction guy, so I don't really know, but I know we've obviously come through this inflationary period with also things were very expensive to build. Is there any thought that, like, for any of these projects, it makes sense to wait a year and rebid because, if this recession is coming, people may be a little hungrier for work? Is this something that could be delayed a year?
By the way, Duke, I did not speak to Ed about this based upon our conversation last night. But go ahead.
No. Jack and I had a conversation about it because a lot of it is petroleum-based products. So it's Ed, it's a good question. It's going to go. We're going to move it over to the facilities subcommittee to have them look at it because Dr. Adley has also talked to us about there's a potential incremental additional funds if there's some changes that we want to make that would improve the track, make it last longer, be safer, and have the right materials on it. So we thought it was best to kind of push it through the facilities process and ask some of those questions that you're asking and that Jack has asked.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
that's tomorrow morning, Ed.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think if part of it, I just happen to follow petroleum for various reasons. When this bid was done, petroleum was probably at about $90 a barrel. It's going down to 70, and they're talking about within a year potentially other things. But also when you add on the enhancements that were also within that bid, I think it's worthwhile for the facilities group to take it on, take another look, and if the enhancements are so desired, then bring it back and we can recast that through a budget process. Which I think, Duke, is what you're alluding to. If it's not just this, but also the 200, it may come back as an enhanced, and we just add whatever money's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to follow up on two things. The first one is, Rich, you and I had a slight conversation on ELP. I know it's something that Dennis raised, and I realized that there wasn't savings going to be in the ELP because some of the services we were talking about of the itinerant were really resident in special ed. But you also mentioned something else that I think is worthwhile for both committees to hear. That and do you want to follow up? Do you know what I'm talking about, Rich? That in fact it might be a little bit more expensive.
It was only yesterday, so.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the strains of having both ELP and really DLC consolidated at Oxford is really on the transportation. It used to be that you might have DLC at Hindley and then you might have DLC at Oxford, or you might have ELP at Tokenique, Royal, and Oxford. Now you have to get kids all across town, in some cases, to Oxbridge. And so that has certainly put a strain on some transportation services. It's meant longer bus rides for students. It's meant possibly having to add bus rides for students. Pickup times have changed for parents' expectations because the route is longer. So that's been a difficulty in terms of having all those services consolidated. We haven't seen savings, but certainly the longer you have cars in service, whether it's Suburbans or first student buses, you're spending more in diesel, you're spending more in gasoline, there's more wear and tear on those vehicles as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I think that's an important aspect from managing. I think most people should agree that consolidating that at Ox Ridge made a lot of sense. So I think everybody's excited and happy that that finally got done.
Yeah, that, Jack, just to, that consolidation conversation wasn't driven by the building committee or the size of the building. It was really driven by, Shirley and her team and Laura Strayton as to what's the best for, number one, these students and how we deliver this program. And I think the ability to incorporate that into the overall Oxbridge ed specs, then came out of that. But there's always, as long as I've been on the board, there was always this, how do we do the right thing for the students and how this program is organized and the services are delivered? And we just never had the space to think about, consolidating it.
Well, I don't want to speak for Clara, but the consolidation of VLP was when John Bolton was on the chair and Clara was on the board as well. That's something, and you're talking about space, was always something that was being considered. I don't know if you want to add to that, Clara.
No, I know that it appeared that it was always running out of space, and I think the idea of a central location is a much better management of the program. And as everybody has said, it's better for the kids, and that's what counts.
Yep, I agree. The other thing that I think is worthy to note, even though we just voted on the contract, while there appears to be a 4.5% increase in the teacher contract, and we'll address this a little bit more when it's ultimately presented at budget, based upon the turnover that was explained, and historically, that 4.5 typically ends up being about a 3.5 overall increase to the budget, based upon the fact that there's turnover, the changes in the salary, and the movement. And so not everybody's getting that full bonus because we're not keeping everyone. So that's something to understand, that even when we look at the budget, you can take that salary increase and do it. And the number that I use is that, while we're talking about it's a significant salary increase, the fact of the matter is, to the overall budget, it may only range between 2.2 to 2.6% of the 5% increase. The other is the increase in health insurance, the added FTEs, and some of the other programs. And while I don't want to get too far ahead, we are cognizant, and we're joking a little bit about it. And some board members referred to this in yesterday's meeting. We should be also cognizant that next year, as Rich said, the cap that we've had on health insurance goes away. And if I'm not mistaken, Rich, you said that had we not have the cap, based upon our experience rate, we could be in a 30 to 40% increase in health insurance. And the other thing is next year our transportation contract is up. And I know another district budgeted a 15 to 20% increase, simply because of the cost of fuel, shortage of drivers, and other things like that. So I don't know if anybody from the board wants to comment on that. Yes, it's not in this budget, but we should be cognizant of what the board is already considering and working on board administration coming next year as well. All right.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, can we have, can F&B have a motion to adjourn this meeting? I need a hand raised on that before everybody leaves. I have Werner to this. I see Beth as a second. Unless anybody wants to say no, we can adjourn. I don't know if education wants to do the same motion to adjourn this meeting.
We do, but I can't see any. So I'll make the motion. Said Washeka. I can't see anybody. So Jack, if you can.
Yes, if somebody from education can raise their hand.
Carolina second.
I have Peter as the second. All those in favor from education, yell aye, or just wave or do something. All right, so that we will end this meeting. To the Board of Ed and Administration, thank you very much. And
Thank you
board
very
Thanks,
members,
Jack. Thanks, Ed.
thank
Good
you.
night, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
I'm going to stop
Good night.
this recording. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night, everybody.